Green Bay, Wisconsin, was a place known for being safe and friendly. It was a town where the famous Green Bay Packers played, and everyone felt a sense of community. The city was full of life and seemed like the last place a major crime would ever happen. But on a night in May 2016, this sense of peace was about to be shattered by a death investigation that shook the entire community. One local resident, a friend of the victim, said the news made her shake uncontrollably, as it was a crime no one ever thought would happen in their town. The story of what happened would reveal twists and turns that no one could have predicted. The victim, Nicole Vanderhiden, often called Nikki by her friends and family. She was a vibrant, outgoing woman, described as a ball of fire. Nicole had 3 children, 2 older children, Michaela and Tyler, from a previous marriage, and a 6-month-old baby named Dylan with her current boyfriend, Doug Dietri. She and Doug had been together since January 2015 and had moved in together. According to her friend Tiffany, Nicole was very happy and excited about their future with the baby. She had a close relationship with her family, and her children were her world. On Friday, May 20, 2016, Nikki and her boyfriend, Doug, decided to get a babysitter for their baby, Dylan, and go out for a fun night. They planned to meet friends at a bar called The Watering Hole to see a concert by the band Steel Panther. The couple was looking forward to a great night out, a chance to relax and have a good time. However, what started as a fun night of music and drinks with friends would soon take a dark turn and end in a terrible nightmare that no one could have seen coming. As the concert ended, Nikki and Doug's friends decided to go to another bar called the Sardine Can. However, Nikki made a last-minute decision to go ahead with Doug's friends, while he stayed behind to finish a conversation. Doug agreed that he would join them at the next bar later. Nikki was seen on the Sardine Can's security camera, talking and dancing with friends. She seemed to be having a great time, but her mood would soon change when she realized Doug had not arrived. As time passed, and Doug still hadn't shown up at the Sardine Can, Nikki began to get upset. She started sending him a series of angry text messages. The messages were described as scorching and accused him of being unfaithful. At some point after 11:30 p.m., Nikki tried to call Doug, but he didn't answer. A friend then called him, and he answered the phone, which made Nikki even more furious. In a fit of rage, she got up and stormed out of the bar, leaving her friends behind. One of Doug's friends, witnessing Nikki's furious departure, ran after her and begged her to come back to the bar. However, Nikki refused and continued walking. She walked down the street, turned left, and disappeared into the night. No one saw her again. When Doug finally learned that Nikki had left, he and his friend Greg got in his car and drove around looking for her. They couldn't find her, so they returned to the Sardine Can where Doug had a few more drinks before leaving. The next day, in the early afternoon, a farmer named Richard Vanderhiden made a horrific discovery. While walking near his land, he saw something over a hill. He first thought it was a deer because of the rust-colored hair, but upon getting closer, he realized it was a young woman's body. The woman was naked except for a pair of socks and a pink wristband. She had no identification on her, and the scene was gruesome. This discovery would be the start of a long and difficult investigation. Brown County Sheriff Sergeant Rick Lopnow was one of the first officers to arrive at the scene. He immediately noticed the large amount of blood and severe injuries to the woman's face, specifically trauma to the left side. Sergeant Brian Slinger, the lead detective on the case, said that identifying the woman was difficult because of the severe injuries. With no identification, the police had to wait for a lead, which would come later that same afternoon. The scene was unlike anything the seasoned officers had ever seen. At 4:30 p.m. that day, the police got their first lead when Doug Dietri called 911 to report his girlfriend, Nikki, was missing. He gave the dispatcher her date of birth and description. The description of Nikki matched the age, size, and hair color of the body found in the field. Detective Slinger immediately sent officers with a hidden camera to Doug's home, which was a little over 3 miles from where the body was discovered. They wanted to get an initial statement from him and see his reaction. During the initial questioning, Doug told the deputies that his friend Greg had dropped him off at home around 2:30 a.m. and that he had gone to sleep around 3 a.m. He claimed he didn't wake up until after 6 a.m., except for a quick moment to check on the baby. The police asked him if he had anything to do with Nikki's disappearance, and he adamantly denied it. While Doug was being questioned, his parents watched their baby, Dylan. It was at the station that police had to deliver the tragic news that Nikki had been murdered. While Doug was being questioned, detectives obtained a search warrant for the home he shared with Nikki. Inside, they found blood on the garage floor and in Nikki's car, specifically on the headboard and in the back seat. They also discovered a pair of Air Jordan sneakers in the garage that had what looked like blood on the bottom. The shoe print on the bottom of the sneakers appeared to match a print found on Nikki's back. To the detectives, all the evidence seemed to be adding up and pointing to Doug as the killer. Just before dawn, an off-duty patrolman found more evidence scattered along a highway ramp less than 2 miles from where Nikki's body had been found. The items included her purse, cell phone, and the clothes she had been wearing that night. Even more damning clues were found in a neighbor's yard across the street from Doug and Nikki's home. A large amount of Nikki's blood, clumps of her blonde hair, and a phone charging cord were all discovered. This new evidence established the real crime scene. With the new evidence from the neighbor's yard, detectives developed a theory about what had happened. They believed that Nikki and Doug had an argument when she got home, and it somehow ended up out in the street. The location of the evidence, just 118 feet from their front door, strongly suggested this. Over 70 pieces of evidence were sent to the state crime lab for testing, and the detectives felt they had enough to make an arrest, even though they still needed to wait for the DNA results to come back. Sheriff deputies recorded the moment they arrested Doug Dietri. During the arrest, Doug became very emotional and said he would answer any questions to clear everything up. He was not charged with murder at that point, while police waited for the DNA results from the crime lab. They wanted to be sure that the blood on the shoes and in the car was Nikki's before they moved forward with a murder charge. The community was shocked and wondering if Doug had really done it. The investigation took a stunning turn 18 days after Doug's arrest. The crime lab results came back and showed that the blood in the car was not Nikki's. The blood in the garage wasn't human, and the stains on the shoes were not blood. With no evidence to connect him to the crime, Doug was released. The most surprising piece of evidence that exonerated him was a Fitbit, a personal tracking device he had been wearing that night. The Fitbit's data, which tracked his heart rate and movement, proved he was asleep during the time of the murder, just as he had claimed. With Doug cleared, detectives Brian Slinger and Richard Lopnow were back at square one. They were tormented by the case and worried it would become a cold case. They needed to find out who had killed Nikki. The sergeants began to re-examine all the evidence. They looked at video cameras from every bridge in Green Bay to figure out how Nikki could have gotten home. They also reviewed phone logs and re-interviewed witnesses, determined not to let this horrific murder go unsolved. Over the next few months, DNA results from the evidence they had sent to the crime lab started to come back. The results were both promising and confusing. Many of the samples taken from Nikki's clothing and from the neighbor's yard contained DNA from an unidentified man. It was the same partial profile on dozens of samples, but there was never enough for a positive identification. The police now had a new suspect, a mystery guy, but they didn't know who he was or how he was connected to the crime. 3 months after Nikki disappeared, the investigators got a call from the crime lab. One of the socks Nikki had been wearing had enough DNA on it to be run through the national database. The result was a positive hit, and the excitement among the investigators was immense. The DNA belonged to a man named George Steven Burch, who was from Virginia. The police were now faced with a new mystery. Why was a man from Virginia in Green Bay, Wisconsin? And what was his connection to Nicole Vanderhiden? George Burch had moved to Green Bay on the 1st of March, 2016, seeking a new start. A longtime friend had helped him find a job and a place to stay. This friend also loaned him a red Chevy Blazer, a car that would become a key piece of evidence in the investigation. Police learned that just a few weeks after Nikki's murder, the red Blazer had been involved in a hit-and-run accident and was later destroyed in a fire. The accident report linked Burch to a specific address in Green Bay. Sergeants Slinger and Lopnow drove by the address they had found for George Burch. As they did, they saw a man standing outside, smoking a cigarette. It was George Burch. Detective Slinger said his hair stood up on the back of his neck, and he had goosebumps. He immediately felt that they had found their guy. The police began to videotape Burch's movements and kept their suspicions to themselves as they continued to gather evidence against him. When George Burch was questioned about the hit and run, he voluntarily handed over his cell phone to the police. This turned out to be a high-tech treasure trove for the investigation. The phone, an Android device, was linked to a Gmail account, and detectives realized they could access Google dashboard data. This data, which is collected from cell phone towers, Wi-Fi hotspots, and GPS locators, can provide a person's exact location at any given time. The investigators obtained a warrant to access George Burch's Google dashboard data. The information they got back was astonishing. The data showed that on the night Nikki disappeared, Burch started his night at a bar called Richard Cranium's, which was a half-mile away from the sardine can. The data then tracked him at 2:30 a.m., leaving that bar and driving to Nicole's house, the crime scene, where he stayed for nearly an hour. The evidence was irrefutable. The Google dashboard data continued to track Burch's movements throughout the night. After leaving Nicole's house, he was tracked at the field where her body was found. He was then tracked near the highway ramp, where her bloody clothes had been discarded. Finally, at 4:22 a.m., he was tracked, returning to his home. This digital trail was a huge piece of evidence that placed him at all 4 key locations of the crime. The investigators now had enough to make an arrest. Police dashboard cameras captured the dramatic arrest of George Burch. An officer who was sent to watch Burch's house called the team and said, "He's on the move. We gotta go now." Everyone rallied up in their cars and drove to make the arrest. On a drizzly September day, 4 months after Nikki's murder, George Burch was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide. When the police told him the reason for his arrest, he immediately asked for a lawyer and refused to talk. Nikki's former brother-in-law, Sean Vanderhiden, said he had no idea who George Burch was, but was relieved that police had someone in custody. For Nikki's family and friends, the anguish was far from over. They now had to wait for the trial. In March 2017, on what would have been Nikki's 32nd birthday, her loved ones gathered at Lake Michigan to release lanterns in her honor. They said the lanterns represented her light, which shone brightly for so many people. Almost a year later, on the 19th of February, 2018, George Burch's murder trial began. The prosecution had a strong case, but the defense had a surprising strategy. They were going to accuse Doug Dietri, Nikki's boyfriend, of the murder. The defense attorney stated that the jury would know that Douglas Dietri, Nicole's boyfriend, murdered Nicole. This was a shocking turn of events that would put Doug's past and alibi under intense scrutiny. For Nikki's family, every day of the trial was agony, but they attended every day to seek answers. They felt that God must have led them there. It was also agonizing for Doug Dietri, who is now being accused of murder by the defense team. His testimony was critical to the prosecution's case, and it was interesting that the man once suspected of killing his girlfriend was now a key witness in the trial. The case would ultimately come down to technology, specifically Doug's Fitbit and Burch's Google dashboard data. The prosecution presented evidence from Doug's Fitbit to prove he could not have been the killer. The data downloaded from his device showed that he barely moved during the hours they believed Nicki was killed. A detective testified that the Fitbit's data matched Doug's story perfectly. The prosecution considered it a huge piece of luck that Doug happened to be wearing a Fitbit that night. The technology proved he was at home and asleep when the murder happened. On the third day of the trial, Doug Dietri took the stand. The prosecution wanted to portray him as a normal guy and a loving father. He told the jury about his family and his son, Dylan, and claimed that he and Nicki had dreamed of getting married one day. He described how they were both drinking heavily on the night she disappeared. He stated that Nicki was drinking very quickly, having had 2 drinks while he was still on his first. He also claimed that he didn't get upset by her angry texts. Under cross-examination, George Burch's attorney, Lee Sugar, tried to prove that things were not as good between Nicki and Doug as he claimed. The lawyer showed the jury a text message that Doug had sent to his mother 10 days before the murder, in which he said he was very seriously thinking about telling Nicki and the kids they have to move. Doug claimed it was just a lie to his mom and that he had never seriously considered breaking up with Nicki. What the jury didn't know was that some of Doug's past girlfriends had accused him of being jealous, abusive, and controlling. One ex-girlfriend even claimed he put a tracking device on her phone, so he would always know where she was. In her angry texts to Doug on the night she died, Nicki also accused him of being abusive. When asked if he had ever physically beaten Nicki, Doug denied it. The defense used this line of questioning to suggest that Doug had a motive to kill Nicki. The defense called the babysitter who was with baby Dylan on the night of the murder to the stand. She told the jury about an odd conversation she had with Doug the day after Nicki died. When she asked what had happened, Doug replied, "I don't know. She hit her head and then she just wanted to walk home." This strange comment made the jurors wonder if Doug's story was entirely true. The defense hoped this would make the jury question if the right man was on trial. On day 8 of the trial, George Steven Burch took the stand to give his version of what happened. He was prompted by his attorney Scott Steins to tell his story. Burch, who was nicknamed Big Country, claimed he was a hard-working family man. He told the jury that he had met Nicki at a local bar and had flirted with her. He claimed that after closing time, he drove Nicki to her home and they sat in his red Chevy Blazer to talk. Burch's story became even more shocking. He claimed that he and Nicki had consensual sex in the back seat of his car. He said he was standing outside the car while she was in the back. Nicki's family and friends had to sit silently in the courtroom and listen to this, even though they knew it was a lie and that she would never do such a thing. They were horrified by Burch's attempt to make it seem as though she had consented. Burch then claimed that while he was having sex with Nicki, he was knocked out. He said he woke up on the ground outside the truck and heard a voice say, "Don't even think about it." When he turned around, he saw a man holding a gun. He claimed he had never seen the man before, but now knew it was Doug Dietri. Burch claimed to have seen Nicki lying on the ground in a pool of blood. He said he didn't know if she was alive. Burch, who was 6'7" and 250 pounds, claimed that Doug, at gunpoint, forced him to put Nicki's body in the Blazer and drive to the field. He said Doug ordered him to carry her body down an embankment. Burch then claimed he lunged at Doug and pushed him as hard as he could before running back to his Blazer and driving away. On the way home, he said he threw Nicki's clothes out the window. Burch's story continued to get more bizarre. He admitted that he never called or told anyone what he had seen. He said he was scared because people get killed for snitching where he was from. The day after the murder, he said he went fishing with friends as if nothing had happened. 2 women who had traveled from Virginia to attend the trial listened to every word. They said they were there to make sure Burch never forgot what he did to their loved one, Joey White, whom he was also accused of killing years before. District Attorney David Lassie cross-examined Burch and set out to show how ridiculous his story was. He questioned Burch's claim that Nicki would have had sex with him in front of her neighbor's home instead of asking her babysitter to leave. Lassay also questioned why Burch, a 6'7" man, wouldn't have any bumps or bruises if he had been knocked out. Lassay asked why Doug would let Burch, a total stranger, get away instead of just killing him. Burch had no good answers for any of it. Lassay then presented what he believed was the real story. He accused Burch of expecting to have sex with Nikki when he drove her home. When she made it clear she was not going to have sex with him and tried to leave his car, Burch's mood changed. Lassay said that Burch then grabbed the charging cord, strangled her, and slammed her head on the ground. Burch lost his cool and began to get angry when Lassay pressed him on these details. During the cross-examination, Burch lost his temper and raised his voice at the district attorney. Lassay's team felt that this outburst was a turning point, as the jury was finally seeing the real Steve Burch, not the big country persona he was trying to project. Lassay concluded his cross-examination by pointing out the absurdity of Burch's claim that he was assaulted and held at gunpoint, but then went fishing with a smile on his face the next day. The prosecution got one last chance to present witnesses to rebut George Burch's story. They brought in the pants that Nicole was wearing the night she died. Burch had claimed that she was undressed in his car, but the pants were dirty, bloody, and hairy. This proved that they had been worn during a struggle. The prosecution argued that Burch's story was a lie, and that Nikki had fought, escaped the car, and was then bludgeoned and strangled with her clothes on. The pants were a key piece of evidence that directly contradicted Burch's story. The prosecution argued that Burch had disrobed Nikki at the crime scene in the field, and that the pants proved that their account of events was the truth. The pants were carefully displayed in court, and the prosecution said that they proved Burch's credibility was zero. He had lied about the entire thing, and had disrobed her at the scene, and simply forgotten her socks. In their final arguments, the prosecution reminded the jury of all the evidence against George Burch. They asked them whose DNA was on Nikki's sock, and who was tracked at all 4 key areas of the crime. They said Burch's story was ridiculous and insulting to your intelligence. The defense, on the other hand, tried to create doubt, arguing that justice for Nicole is not going to be delivered by a wrongful conviction of George Burch. They insisted that Doug Dietri had the motive and opportunity. The case went to the jury, and the courtroom was filled with tension. Just 45 minutes later, the jury sent a question back to the judge. They asked to see the bloody cord that was used to strangle Nikki, as well as a cord that was found in Doug Dietri's garage, to see if they were a match. The question made many in the courtroom wonder if the jury was actually considering Burch's story and whether they would convict him. It was a stressful moment for everyone. After a 9-day trial and more than 50 witnesses, the jury took just over 3 hours to reach a verdict. As the verdict was about to be read, Nikki's family was shaking, and her mother felt a horrible feeling that the verdict would be not guilty. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. The jury foreman read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant George Steven Burch guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. When the verdict was read, everyone in the courtroom gasped. Nikki's family and friends cried tears of relief and said, "Thank God." The family said the sound of relief they heard in the courtroom would stick with them forever. 2 women who had traveled from Virginia for the trial, Shaina Stowe and Carla Rodes, also felt a sense of relief. They believed that Joey White, the man Burch was accused of killing years before, was there with them that day, finally getting justice. Doug Dietri was also in the courtroom, holding his mother's hand. He was visibly relieved when the verdict was read. He had not been on trial, but he was finally free of any suspicion. The case proved that technology, such as the Fitbit and Google dashboard data, can not only connect someone to a crime, but can also exonerate an innocent person. One of the detectives felt bad that Doug had to sit in jail for 18 days, but was proud that the technology had proven his innocence. The case highlighted the importance of high-tech forensics in modern investigations. Without the Fitbit, to corroborate Doug's alibi and the Google dashboard data to place George Burch at the crime scenes, the outcome could have been very different. The detectives acknowledged that without this technology, it's possible that Doug Dietri, an innocent man, would be in prison instead of George Burch. This case was a landmark moment for the use of technology in law enforcement. 2 months after the verdict, George Burch was back in court for his sentencing. Nikki's family was there, as were Doug Dietri and his mother. The judge spoke directly to Burch, saying that his crime had destroyed and ruined Nikki's family. Since Wisconsin has no death penalty, the judge gave Burch the harshest sentence possible: life in prison without the possibility of parole. He told Burch, "This is a crime that I believe merits the death penalty, and that he would have to die in prison for what he had done." The judge's words gave the families a sense of closure. While it was not a time for celebration, the justice served was what they wanted. For Nikki's mother, Vicky, and her family, the trial and sentencing were a long and painful journey, but they were finally able to get some answers and see her killer held accountable. The story of Nicole Vanderhiden's murder became a testament to the power of new technology in solving old-fashioned crimes and ensuring that the right person is brought to justice.